Chapter 1. Whispers Below. In the stink dark of the Under-Empire's bowels, where even light feared to crawl, the chitter-click of clawed feet and hissing whispers echoed endlessly down damp tunnels. Walls of pockmarked stone wept slime and warp taint, the very air quivering with the breath of ancient decay. Packmaster Skreekweasel stood motionless atop a jagged slab of obsidian, surveying his warband through slit-pilled eyes. Cloaked in black stitched with rat skin and powdered bone, his wiry frame barely stirred, but his tail twitched with ceaseless, paranoid energy. Around him, gutter runners and night-furred assassins knelt in a half-moon, awaiting his word with blades drawn and ears pricked. No Skaven trusted another, especially not Skreekweasel, least of all himself. From the darkness behind, a bone chime rattled as a hunched messenger scampered forth, stinking of incense and fear. "Yes, Master Mose Weasel, message from High Fang Whisperer. Orders, great plan, big glory plan for you. Skreek's claw closed slowly around the parchment scroll, but his other paw shot out and seized the messenger's throat. He brought his snout close, nostrils flaring. Speak slow, clever, no lies, no traps, yes, or I tear throat pipe out, drink it like wine." The messenger whimpered, head bobbing frantically. No trap. Council wants fortress fall fail. Kazad Gromdur, food, water, rot it, poison it, you ruin. Then grey seers come, swarm, flood, victory, yes. Skreek's teeth gleamed in the gloom as a grin split his snout. Of course. I knew. But even as he released the trembling underling, his eyes darted, calculating. The Council of 13 never gifted power freely. There were claws beneath every word, a knife in every shadow. If they wanted him to rot the dwarfhold's belly, that meant someone else wanted him to die trying. And then he heard it. The sound he hated most. Claws. Many claws. Approaching from the east tunnel. They came in a pack, sleek and shadowy, led by a scarred brute with a jagged ear and poison-green eyes. Snickchick Needlytail, his rival in all but name. Snickchick was younger, leaner, hungrier, too ambitious, too clever by half, and worst of all, appointed as Skreek's ally. The air between them was thick with rivalry the moment Snickchick slunk into the light. "Weasel thing," Snicky churred, voice oily. "I smell fear in your stink. Council say we cripple stunt things together, yes? Skreek's claws twitched at the word we. Every hair on his spine stood bristling, but he bowed low, mockingly so. "Yes, great sharp Snitchick, work together, yes. Like nestmates, like bloodkin." His grin widened, fake as warp brass. "Like knife and paw, yes." Snickchick only chuckled and tossed a limp, eyeless dwarf scout's head onto the ground. It hit the stone with a wet splat. "Found this mate wing near the lower vents. They sniff Snick. They know something's wrong. We act quick fast, no slip fail." Skreek stooped and lifted the head, licking the blood from the beard. "Then we poison fast. I lead the water flask team. You take the grain shacks, yes? Dangerous above ground, you brave, clever, strong." Snitchick's whiskers twitched suspiciously, but his ego swelled under the flattery. He hissed in assent. "I go, kill quiet many. Dwarf meat will starve, thirst, suffer. Then, Council reward me." Skreek turned, his back already retreating. Yes. Reward you, or whoever returns alive." The words were soft, muttered, barely audible, but Snickchick's ears flicked at them. Skreek was already whispering to his second twitch scalp, a ghoul-named Skaven with a crooked jaw. "Send Slit Eyes after Needletail. Let dwarfs see him, chop him. If he escape, returns, stab him in sleep nest. No share glory." Twitch Scalp nodded with a clicking grin, disappearing into the dark like smoke. Skreek turned back to his warband, talons raised. to the black sluice. We rot their bloodwater, drown them in bile. Tonight, yes, yes, we feast on dwarf flesh. The warband erupted into a chorus of shrieks, tail whips, and skittering frenzies. As they plunged into the gloom, Skreekweasel whispered to himself, smiling wide, "Victory for Eshin, death for Needletail, and if Wormfire eats us all, well, I will not die alone, alone." Chapter 2. The Rotting Plan. The tunnels yawed like broken jaws, their walls coated in grime, half-melted bone, and the faint pulsing glow of embedded warpstone veins. The very stone hummed with a sickly rhythm, like a diseased heart buried deep beneath the world. Packmaster Skreekweasel led the march from the front, twitching every few paces, blade daggers clicking against one another at his sides. His warband moved behind in a loose, jittering column, silent except for the scritch-scritch of claws and the hissing exchange of threats between gutter runners. Behind them trudged a bulbous cart of iron, belching green smoke. Alchemist Tick-Fizzlet-Tongue, a hunched, mask-wearing lunatic, clung to the side, cackling and slapping pipes with a bent wrench. "Brew near ready, yes, yes. One sip, sip, hold, coughs blood bile, delicious disease." Warp flame flickered from vents as the alchemist fed another powdered dose of refined warpstone into the mixture, causing the whole thing to shudder and fart violently. "Do not waste it, fool thing," Skreek snarled. "Need every drip drop for water flask." "Care, care," Tick reached. "Too much, it melt the pipes. Boil your tail flesh clean." A sharp hiss from the tunnel ahead silenced them. One of the forward scouts, Sniv Nickelfang, gestured toward a narrow offshoot in the rock, a tunnel veering off like a broken rib. It was unlike the others, not carved by claws or Skaven chisel saws, but hewn smooth, lined in ancient stone and sealed at the mouth with thick iron chains and a slab of rune-marked Dwarven granite. Even the air around it stank different, old, dry, dead air. No mold, no slime, just the faint brittle scent of dust and something foul that refused to decay. Skreek stepped close, brushing his claws across the etched runes. A blue spark flared, pure Dwarven warding magic. His hand recoiled, hissing. Sealed hid by stunties. Strong magic. Old. His eyes narrowed. Smells like death. Rot. Not dwarf, not Skaven. Something more. But not now. He turned abruptly, tail lashing. "We move. No time for crypt worms and cursed tombs. Poison the flask, bring down the hold. Then maybe we come back, yes, to loot it." The warband scurried past the sealed tunnel, though many glanced back with twitching eyes and flattened ears. Tick-Fizzlet-Tongue lingered, sniffing the stale air and giggling to himself. I heard a growl, or was that the pipes? They pressed on, deeper into the bowels of the mountain, toward the hidden cistern where the dwarfs stored the purest water. The plan was clear. Contaminate it with warp poison so potent it would rot lungs, blister skin, and cloud minds. By the time the dwarfs noticed, it would be too late. Skreek's warband would leave behind only sickness, madness, and death, and no trace of who had done it. Above them, Kazad Gromdur stood proud in stone. Below, the Skaven writhed like maggots, preparing to turn water into venom and bread into plague. And behind them, deep in the sealed tunnel, something ancient stirred. Something that remembered blood. Chapter 3. Contact with the enemy. The air grew cooler as the warband neared the cistern vault. Not refreshing, cool-like surface winds, but thick, heavy, the kind of cold that clung to fur and made breathing a chore. Above them, the echo of Dwarven hammers was faint, rhythmic. Each beat a throb of life in the stone heart of Kazad Gromdur. Packmaster Skreekweasel crouched in the gloom, yellowed eyes gleaming beneath the hood of his rag cloak. Before him the cistern loomed, a massive chamber lined in obsidian pipes, with a domed ceiling of silver-veined stone and thick rivulets of water trickling down ancient gutters. The central pool shimmered with pristine clarity. "Too pure, too clean," Skreek hissed. "We fix that." Behind him, alchemist Tiket Fizzlet-Tongue giggled madly, uncorking one of the bloated, glassy flasks. The fluid within pulsed like a living thing, deep green, oily, bubbling like it hated containment. A single drop hit the stone and sizzled, leaving a pit the size of a fist. "Wop dat in a bottle, yes, yes. It melt eyes, lungs, dwarf stomach. Beautiful plague." "Dump it, now, now," Skreek barked. Slaves, skinny, scab-ridden rats with manacles still hanging from their wrists were shoved forward. They whimpered, holding barrels wrapped in warp steel bands. The moment the stoppers were pulled, foul green sludge poured out, steaming where it hit the water. Within moments, the once clear cistern boiled with toxic clouds. Fish floated belly up. The stone lining began to weep. Mission complete. But then, clang. A sharp cry. Steel scraping stone. A flash of torchlight down the tunnel mouth. Dwarves, armored in bronze and rune-etched iron, a patrol of Kazad Gromdur's tunnel wardens stormed in. 6 stout warriors, beards bristling, axes raised. "Stun things," Skreek spat, drawing his jagged saber. "Delay. Kill if can, but do not stay." The Skaven warband scattered like rats in fire. Some vanished into side cracks, others sprinted into the darkness. But the slaves? They were too slow. Skreek turned, snatching the smallest one, Gribble Snout, a runt barely larger than a pup, and hurled him into the dwarves' path. "Protect master, you filth flesh." Gribble shrieked as an axe cleaved him from collar to crotch. Blood sprayed in a steaming arc. Another slave tried to crawl into a pipe, but was caught by the ankle and dragged out, his squeals ending with a crunch as a boot crushed his skull. More slaves fell. Skreek, already halfway up a slime tunnel, looked back just once. Then his eyes narrowed. Perfect blame, yes, yes. Later, when the survivors regrouped in a scab-crusted maintenance nest, Skreek paced before them with an angry scowl. "Needly tail fool. He promised patrols would be distracted. Lies. Sabotage." Twitch, Scalp, nodded in agreement, licking his fangs. "His spies fail, almost doomed us all." Skreek slammed a clawed paw on a rusted pipe. "Enough. I report failure to the council. Blame fall on him, and we plan next strike. Dwarves bleed now. Soon they drown in their own bile water." Behind him, one of the slaves coughed, his fur blistering from exposure to warp fumes. He reached out with trembling fingers. "The master helped me." Skreek didn't hesitate. He kicked the rat backward into the still-smoking flask, where the remaining warp poison boiled him alive. The warband watched in silence. Then, one by one, they began to chitter in approval. Fear was loyalty. Terror bred obedience. Skreek's tail twitched with delight. "Next, we hit the grain. Let Needletail think he leads. Let him march into death. Then Skreek rises." Chapter 4. Treachery's Seeds. The tunnels above the poisoned cistern grew narrower, their walls slick with fungus and old dwarf blood, long dried and flaking like scabs. Every breath was a rasp through dust and mildew, every sound a whisper that didn't belong. It was here, in this stinking artery of the Under-Empire, that Packmaster Skreekweasel sowed the rot of treachery petal by poisoned petal. He huddled over a crude map, sketched in filth and rat blood on tan dwarf hide. The torchlight flickered green from the warpstone shards embedded in the walls, making his eyes glow like malevolent stars. Behind him, Twitch Scalp stood in shadow, gnawing on a finger bone like a dog with a toy. Skreek hissed, "Send message call. Yes, yes," from Needletail himself. His mark. Seal it with scrap hair. Add his stink. Convince dumb fool scouts. Good. Good. He held up the forged parchment, elegantly disgusting in its detail. To my loyal slit eyes. Patrol coming, big fat blind, easy kill, route 7A, hide in soot cracks, slay 'em all. Glory! Snick-cheek Needletail, fangs bite deepest. Skreek giggled, claws clicking against one another. Scouts gone. Gone, yes? Dead, or lost. Either way, less loyal to Needletail, more to me. Twitch's eye twitched, delighted. We steal their knives, poison their poison, take their black powder stash too? Everything. Even cloaks say it's tribute. For victory. For survival, they believe. And so, the message was delivered, handed by a trembling runt who barely escaped Skreek's warband's claws. The scouts, a squad of 6 black-cloaked gutter runners sworn to Needletail, slinked off to a phantom ambush, eager for glory and favor. They never returned. Maybe they walked into a dwarf ambush by accident. Maybe they fell into a chasm. Or maybe, just maybe, Skreek's own assassins were waiting with garrote wire and poisoned fangs. No one would know. No one cared. But Skreek would use it. Later that rock cycle, the survivors of both warbands gathered in a ruined fungal chamber. Mold grew in thick curtains from the ceiling, dripping caustic ooze into shallow pools of rot. Skreek stood before them, posture regal by Skaven standards. His cloak was darker than usual, torn from one of Needletail's missing scouts. Around his neck hung a medallion once worn by Slitmaw, a scout now feeding cave fungus somewhere. You see, Needletail leads to death. He sends Slit Eyes to false fight. All dead. Why? For him. For pride. The Skaven muttered, tails lashing. Doubt crept like mold through their loyalty. One of Needletail's lieutenants, a scarred assassin named Bleakwhisker, hissed. Proof. What proof? Prove you have, liar thing. Skreek snarled, tossing the medallion at his feet. They carried his mark. His orders. I found bodies, hitten by dwarf beasts, burned by bolt fire. See how he feeds you to flame? Bleakwhisker stared at the token. Blood still clung to it. The chamber grew quiet. Then another voice, younger, piped up. We lost brother son to that patrol. He followed Needletail's order, believed him. Skreek's grin widened. Follow me now. Now. I bring victory. I poison. I survive. I reward. Not kill like backstabber. A few Skaven dropped to one knee, then more. Even Bleakwhisker, tail twitching, gave a shallow bow. Skreek turned to Twitch Scalp once more, a sliver of triumph in his tone. Send tribute back to Needletail. Send meat, rank meat. Say it's from his scouts. Wrapped in cloak, let him wonder. Let him know. Behind his fanged smile, Skreek's mind plotted deeper still. Loyalty bought in fear was loyalty that must never be trusted. But for now, he was stronger. And Snitchik Needletail? He would soon find his nest full of rot. Chapter 5. The rune-sealed tunnel. The underroads twisted with a deeper wrongness now. The air was heavier, more than the usual warp filth. There was a tremble in the stone beneath Skreek's clawed feet, a vibration like some thing stirring far below, dragging its putrid lungs full of ancient dust. Packmaster Skreekweasel sat hunched in a rusted alcove carved from a forgotten Dwarven outpost, poring over ragged maps, scrolls, and blood-splattered dwarf ledgers prized from slain bodies. Symbols circled, scratched out, rewritten in rat-claw script. One path caught his eye again and again. A sealed tunnel mouth marked Runes of Ancestral Lock. Never open. A dream had come the night before. Not a normal dream. Skreek's usual night terrors involved Needletail's severed head talking from a meat pile. No, this was whispering shadows. A great winged thing rising. Mountains split. Warpstone falling like rain, and Skreek atop a throne of bones, crowned in flame. He was still cackling softly when the Warp-Seer Skullclutch entered. He wore rusted armor, etched with fell glyphs, and his third eye, a milky orb embedded in his brow, flickered. You scratch dig where no claw should dig. Dig, the seer rasped. Tunnels hum with wrong. Old death. Not dwarf, not man-thing, not ratkin. Something forgotten. Sealed for reason. Left to rot. Leave it be, fool chief. Skreek turned, eyes narrowed. You fear power, yes. I smell opportunity. The dwarfs tried to hide something. Means it's valuable. Skullclutch hissed. Or cursed. Doom-laced. This death scent is old. Older than rat spawn. My warp eye bleeds when I stare near it. Skreek's grin stretched unnaturally wide. Good. Means it's real. That night, the warband slinked through the undertunnels like ticks through meat. Only a select few followed Skreek, Twitch Scalp, 2 assassins, and a pair of mindless slaves dragging a rune pick, a cursed tool forged for scraping Dwarven magic. They came upon the tunnel mouth again, the one with the chains and the granite slab etched in glowing runes. But now the runes flickered, dimmer than before, as if the tunnels sensed their return. The slaves whimpered. One soiled himself. The runes hummed, vibrating the air. A low, whale-like moan echoed beyond the seal, though no wind stirred. Skreek stepped forward, eyes locked onto the wardstone. Deface it. Now. Twitch Scalp hesitated, claws trembling. Maybe. Seer, right? Maybe we wake what's best left sleep. Skreek slashed his second's arm open without turning. Do it, or be buried with it. The slaves obeyed, ramming the rune pick into the dwarf stone. Sparks flew, the runes screamed, high and shrill like dying metal, and a wave of freezing air burst from the cracks. It hit them like a wall. One slave dropped instantly, his eyes solid ice, body convulsing. The granite slab cracked down the center with a grinding moan. A gust followed, a fetid breath, old and meaty, laced with rot and the stink of corpses never burned. Inside only darkness, and a feeling, no, a certainty that something behind that veil of shadow had just opened an eye. Skreek took one step forward, claws curling. So cold, like it hungers, like me. Then from the darkness, a sound, a growl, impossibly deep, like boulders shifting on ancient bones. The surviving slave screamed and ran, only to slam into the wall and shatter his jaw. Twitch grabbed him and silenced him with a dagger through the back of the throat. Skreek grinned, licking the ice-flecked air from his whiskers. Seal it again, not fully, just enough. I need more time, but it lives, yes, and I will use it. Behind him, the tunnel still wept chill air and darkness, and deep within, the vault stirred. Chapter 6. Shadows Stirring. The tunnel breathed. It breathed. Each step into the rift beyond the runes brought Packmaster Skreekweasel deeper into the lungs of a long-dead world. The cracked dwarven stone bled frost from its wounds, seeping vapor like the exhales of a corpse too stubborn to stop whispering. Skreek's warband moved in crouched silence, Twitch Scalp, his ever-loyal second, 2 robed alchemists, and 3 elite gutter runners whose blades still dripped with Needletail's missing scouts. All bore torches, but the flames guttered unnaturally, sickly and green, casting more shadow than light. And ahead the tunnel opened. They entered a vast cavern, dome-shaped and ribbed like a monstrous womb. The ceiling was high above, lost in webs of fungus and hanging bone. Massive skeletal remains, both dwarven and unknown, lay stacked like forgotten offerings. Skulls lined the alcoves, some cracked, others seemingly gnawed. One bore an iron helmet fused with its skull, runes etched into the bone itself. The ground crunched with each step, not rock, not rubble, but bone dust. Even Skreek faltered slightly, his eyes wide, tail twitching wildly. No record, no map ever said this, no stink trace of it in dwarf lore, he breathed. This is hidden history. Mine now. Twitch's nose twitched. Feel that? Pulse in the air, like heartbeat but not ours. Ahead of them, at the far end of the cavern, loomed the vault door. It was a monstrosity, 10 rat lengths high, curved like a tombstone, and fused from both blackened dwarf steel and necromantic obsidian. Glyphs of death, binding and silence, etched in both dwarf runes and Man-Thing's foul sigils, swam across the surface. Some glowed faintly purple, others flickered, as if waking up after millennia of restless sleep. The door was cracked down its center, sealed by a massive, corroded iron lock, fused shut with melted bone. Skreek's pupils shrank to pinpricks. What sealed this? What died here and refused to stay dead? Asked Harry. One of the alchemists stepped forward, cackling nervously. Can break rune lock. Yes, with warp acid, rune-corrupting oils. Just need blood. Skreek didn't even hesitate. He pointed at one of the gutter runners. You, cut your throat. Give gift to door. The assassin froze. Me, loyal. Killed 5 for you, Packmaster. Skreek narrowed his eyes. Exactly why. The door must see strong blood, worthy warmth. The assassin barely had time to scream as Twitch Scalp stepped in and gutted him from pelvis to chin. His organs spilled wetly onto the stone, steam rising from the hot viscera. The alchemist smeared the blood over the lock with trembling fingers, then poured bubbling green fluid from a flask. It hissed, burned, and howled, not a sound of pressure release, but a soul scream dragged from some long-dead throat. The vault door shuddered. Stone cracked. A blast of freezing, fetid wind surged out, filled with the scent of rotting flesh, ancient despair, and burnt marrow. The torches flickered to almost nothing. The floor groaned, echoing with something below. Something aware. Something waking. One of the alchemists dropped to his knees, eyes wide and bleeding from the sockets. It sees me. It knows we're here. The worm, the wire... Skreek stabbed him in the throat before he could say more. Silence. We are shadows, not cattle. We go forward. The vault door moaned open just enough to allow a rat thing through. Beyond the breach was black, thick and oily. No torchlight pierced it. But something moved inside. Skreek turned to Twitch, his voice ragged with glee. We found it. Power, death, weapon. Now I learn its name, and I use it to break Kazad Gromdur, break Needletail, break the Council if they betray me. And from the breach in the door, a single drop of black ichor dripped to the stone and sizzled, eating through bone and dwarf steel alike. Chapter 7. The Sleeper Awakes. The air curdled. It was no longer simply cold. It bit. Every breath Skreekweasel took sliced through his throat like razors. The unnatural fog seeped from the vault like a living thing, dragging slime-gray tendrils across the stone floor, curling between bones, coiling around ankles like skeletal fingers. It didn't just obscure, it infected sight. Shapes moved in the mist that weren't real, or perhaps too real. One moment it was just vapor. The next, a hunched figure with twisted antlers, faceless and shrieking in silence, reaching out before dissolving again. Twitch, scalp gagged and stumbled back, clutching his throat. No air, no breath, breathe in this stink-cursed fog. It smothers like grave worms. Skreek held up a claw, not to comfort, but to silence. His eyes were locked ahead, fixed on the faint, rhythmic glow pulsing within the black. A heartbeat, not natural, not alive. They passed into the inner vault like shadows, drifting across the border of damnation. The chamber opened like a charnel cathedral, its walls made of mortared bone and rusted chains. Necromantic glyphs pulsed faintly, feeding from warp energy leaking from the breach. Altar stones lay shattered. Smashed coffins wept congealed ichor and glassy marrow. It wasn't a vault. It was a mausoleum for monsters. At the far end lay a colossal pit, rimmed by black marble and cracked with veins of green light. Chains the size of towers hung slack from above, snapped like twine. Warp lamps, once hammered into the ceiling, had melted. The stink of long, dead dragon flesh hit them like a club. Then came the sound. A wet, dragging inhale. The fog swirled. Something moved. Bone grated against bone as a massive claw, skinless and half-mummified, pulled itself upward from the pit. Rotting flesh hung in tatters, revealing ancient scales slathered in grave mold and stitched with black veins of corrupted magic. The creature was immense, easily the size of a fortress tower, hunched and skeletal with massive bat wings curled like folded paper. Its skull was elongated, fang-cracked and horn-crowned, but half-eaten by time. One socket blazed green with undeath, the other was empty, leaking flies and embers. It raised its head, inhaling the scent of the Skaven like a wolf sniffing meat too long uncooked. Varkhazhul the carrion worm, a dragon slain during the vampire wars, reanimated by dark masters, sealed away by dwarf and elf alike, now woken by greed, by claw, by warp taint. Twitch scalp shrieked, "Run, run, burn it, burn the weir." But Skreek didn't run. He stepped closer, drawn by something else. Near the dragon's pit, half buried in black sand, was a shattered sarcophagus. Runes of the Lamian bloodline etched its lid, fractured but still humming with dread. Inside, bones draped in royal armor rotted beside a broken chalice filled with solidified blood. A cracked crown lay to the side, fused with the skull's scalp. Skreek looked upon the tomb of the vampire who once ruled this beast, and the fog entered him. He froze, eyes rolled back, mouth twitching. Visions flooded his mind, not his own. A kingdom of bones with him atop it. Radkin hordes bowing, whispering Wormlord Skreek. Dwarves impaled on dragon fangs. The Council of 13 crushed beneath his tail. Himself riding atop Varkhazhul, plague banners trailing behind them like carrion banners. He snapped out of it, gasping, drooling, heart clawing his chest. This is mine. Mine to claim. Yes, yes, we chain it, leash it, ride it, use it. Behind him, one of the alchemists didn't move. His eyes were gone, boiled in his skull, blood leaking from his ears. Twitch scalp spoke through clenched fangs. This thing, it woke in death, it hates, it hungers. Skreek turned, cackling. Good. Let it hunger. Let it bite the world. I will be the one to feed it. From the pit, the dragon's green eye blinked once. It did not roar. It watched and waited. Chapter 8. Needletail's Revenge. There was a smell in the stone now, not rot, not poison, not even the soured blood of Skaven betrayal. No, rage. It coiled through the tunnels like boiling steam, whispering of spilled secrets and shattered loyalty. And Sneakchick Needletail followed that stench with a grin full of venom and vengeance. They came from the west shafts, 12 elite gutter runners, draped in soot-black cloaks and armed with warp-silver blades coated in paralytic venom so potent it melted nerve endings on contact. Needletail led them himself, eyes gleaming, tail slicing the air behind him like a whip ready to strike. He had learned everything. The false orders, the vanished scouts, the stolen resources. But worst of all, the whispers. That Skreek had found something buried, something ancient, something powerful, and had not shared. "No more," he hissed, stalking the tunnel curve toward the vault. "He plays like clawless pup. I show him true pain." Meanwhile, inside the death vault, Skreekweasel stood triumphant, arms raised before the half-risen carcass of Varkhazhul the carrion worm, still barely conscious in its pit of bile and memory. "Tame it, chain it, I name it mine," he shrieked, spit flying. Behind him, Twitch Scalp and 2 alchemists worked feverishly, dragging chains coated in warpstone fluid, etched in binding glyphs stolen from necromancer scrolls. Every clank echoed like blasphemy. The fog twisted around them like curious hands. They didn't hear the assassins until it was too late. A flash of green steel, a choking gargle. One alchemist dropped instantly, throat severed to spine. Twitch spun, raising a dagger, but was kicked full in the face by Needletail, who landed cat-like among the gore. His snout curled with hate. "Hello, red bastard." Skreek whirled, blade already drawn, teeth bared. "Needletail. You came to die? You first." They collided with shrieking steel and slashing claws, fur flying as they tumbled across the vault stones. Skreek sliced Needletail's thigh open, but caught a slash across his ribs in return. The fog danced with blood. Above them, Varkhazhul stirred. The roar began as a tremble, a soundless vibration that quaked in their marrow. Then it built, a howl dragged from the pit of every grave the dragon had ever clawed through. As it roared, the cavern didn't shake, it broke. Rocks split, ancient bone combs shattered. The mouth of the cavern cracked open, and dozens of Skaven, reinforcements Skreek had hidden for ambush, were crushed beneath falling rubble, their screams blending with the echoing bellow of the undead worm. The ground itself ruptured like infected flesh. A warp fire lantern exploded, hurling molten glass into a gutter runner's face. He clawed at his head, shrieking, before tumbling into the pit, where Varkhazhul's wing unfurled like a sail made of corpse leather. Needletail and Skreek were thrown apart by the blast wave. Dust and bone chunks filled the air. Skreek smashed into a pillar, teeth snapping on impact. Needletail landed hard, a rib cracking, his vision flickering. But even through the blood and smoke, they stared at the thing rising from the pit. No longer half-dead. No longer dormant. Awake, fully, wrathful. Its green eye blazed like a sun seen through rotting tissue. Its jaw opened, and within its mouth burned the fetid remnants of a soul that had never wanted to be raised. And it hated everything that lived. Skreek dragged himself to his feet, every bone shrieking. "We must control, bang it, we must." Twitch Scalp, bleeding heavily, grabbed him by the scruff. "Too late. It knows, it remembers, it is no slave." Needletail, coughing blood, laughed madly. "You fool. You woke. The end." And above them all, Varkhazhul roared again, its wings unfurling like a death knell. Its breath was a plague, its fury eternal. The vault was no longer a tomb. It was a war zone. Chapter 9. Wyrm Unbound. The vault was a furnace of death. Stone groaned, warped and cracked, as Varkhazhul the carrion worm, no longer slumbering, no longer bound, rose fully from the pit like a corpse refusing to stay buried. His colossal bulk scraped against the chamber walls, muscles long rotted now, pulsing with necromantic venom. Flakes of skin fell like ash, bone glistened beneath. Wings spread, dry, torn sheets of leathery ruin that still beat with monstrous force. And in his maw, fire. Not flame, but soul fire, a sickly green vapor that devoured flesh, warped bone, and fed on pain. The nearest Skaven, too slow to flee, was caught mid-sprint. His scream barely started before Varkhazhul's jaws clamped down, crunching through armor and sinew. Bones snapped like dry sticks. Blood splattered in a steaming geyser. Another Skaven tried to climb a broken chain to escape. He didn't even make it halfway before a claw the size of a siege ram impaled him, then flung his twitching body into the air, to be caught in the dragon's teeth like meat thrown to a pet. Dozens died in minutes. Corpses littering the vault, old dwarf, long-dead vampire spawn, even rotted necromancer husks, began to twitch. The beast's presence alone was a necromantic beacon. Bone reassembled, rotten flesh squirmed over shattered limbs, hollow sockets flared green. Dead things walked once more, drawn to their master. And he feasted on all of it. The more Varkhazhul consumed, the more the fog thickened, bloated with magic, thick enough to choke a thought. Elsewhere in the vault, Skreek Weasel, fur soaked with blood and spittle, ran. He crawled across debris, shoved a wounded night runner into a collapsing tunnel to distract a swarm of risen dwarf skeletons, and didn't look back when the rat screamed. "This is Needly-Tail's fault. Fault," he spat between gasps. "He brought ruin. He woke the Wyrm." Twitch, scalp, limping behind, coughed blood. You opened the vault." "I did not know what was inside," Skreek shrieked, slamming a paw against the wall. "He interfered. He provoked. The dragon could have been mine." Meanwhile, Snip-Snip Needletail wasn't faring much better. Dragging himself through a lesser shaft slick with slime and rat blood, he growled curses with every breath. Skreek brought this, his greed rot, his lies. He thought to enslave the worm, but it burns us all. He stumbled across a pair of his own runners, panicked and blood-slicked. "The worm kills everything," one whimpered. "Then we feed it, Skreek," Needletail hissed, slashing the coward across the face to shut him up. The fracture begins. In the twisting tunnels and shattered caverns beyond the vault, survivors gathered, but not in unity. The warbands, once reluctantly allied under Skreek and Needletail, were now splintered. Paranoia clawed at every throat. Whispers filled the dark. "Beatwokrit, Skreek. He brought the dragon." "No, Needletail. He disturbed the tomb." Both deserved death, Dad. Bitter factions formed in minutes. Blood was spilled before the vault's dust even settled. And worse, some Skaven stared back toward the fog-wreathed ruin with hunger. The warp-tainted air now glowed faintly, rich with necromantic residue. A pair of alchemists drank from it, weeping, their bodies spasming as veins blackened, but they stood straighter afterward, more alive, more dead. One, now missing half his face, whispered, "Power, power in the worm. We worship, we drink, we serve." Their blades were still sharp, their minds broken. They began to spread. Cult was born in that moment. Wormlings, they called themselves. Fatical, suicidal, empowered by the death breath of the beast. Skreek watched from a crag as Varkhazhul coiled through the air like a serpent, reanimating the walls with each breath. "We cannot kill it," he hissed, fangs bared. "But we can use the chaos." He turned to Twishkiscalt. "Find the rune binders. Find the scrolls. If we can't slay it, we bind it. Truly this time. and I, not Needletail, shall be its master." Somewhere deeper in the stone, the dragon shrieked again, and the world shook. Chapter 10. Dwarven Dread. The anvils of Kazad Gromdur rang no longer. The great forged chambers, once ablaze with fire and hammer song, now echoed with silence. A sour, unnatural chill crept into the lower levels. Lanterns flickered, stone groaned. Barrels of once pristine water now frothed green, and grain sacks split open, crawling with black worms that hissed and spat smoke. The runesmiths called it a curse. The priests of Valaya called it an abomination. But the warriors? They just called it what it was. War. At the mountain's inner bastion, Thane Brock Flamebeard stood before the graven image of his ancestors, fists clenched. A bear of a dwarf with shoulders like cracked iron and a beard as red as forge fire, Brock had served in 6 wars, 3 whole defenses, and once he headed a troll with a mining pick. But this reeked of something worse. Rotten bones in the air, stone moans like it's choking on filth, he growled, voice like gravel soaked in ale. This ain't no Skaven raid. There's death moving below. Behind him stood his hand-picked retinue, 12 ironbreakers, plate-armored and grim-eyed, 2 rune lords, chanting softly to keep the rune light burning, and a trio of deep delvers scouts, silent as tunnel wind, clad in leathers and stone-glazed cloaks. The Thane turned to his second, Gunric Colclef, a blunt-nosed warrior with an axe that had split more Skaven than most dwarves had beard braids. "Scouts first," Brock said. "Find what creeps below." Gunric gave a curt nod. "If there's rats, we'll hear their bones breaking." In the tunnels below, the scouts moved through the vein shafts like whispers in stone. The deeper they went, the colder it became, unnaturally so. Condensation dripped upward, fungi grew sidewise. One touched a glowing mushroom, and it screeched. They passed shattered supports, blood-slick rock, and scratch marks in the walls where claws had torn at stone, not in battle, but in panic. Then they saw it. A tunnel mouth ahead, rimmed with frost and bone dust. Beyond it, shadows that flickered without source. The lead scout, Boric Stoneeyes, held up a fist. "Hold," he rasped. "Movement!" And from the gloom they came. 6 of them. Skaven, or what used to be. But no breath puffed from their jaws. Their fur hung in clumps, and their eyes burned with unnatural light. Some moved like puppets with cut strings. Others jerked with speed no corpse should have. Their claws twitched even in death. One bore the shattered emblem of Clan Eshin. Another had no lower jaw, its tongue wagging obscenely. A third dragged a snapped tail behind it like a flail. "By Grimnir's beard," Graxath whispered. Then they attacked. The first rat leapt with feral speed, teeth gnashing, only to be met mid-air by Boric's pickaxe driving through its skull. It fell in 2 pieces, twitching. But the others swarmed. One scout's scream was cut short as undead claws tore his throat out. Another was dragged down, head bashed into the stone again and again until it split like a fruit. Boric and the last survivor backed up the tunnel, blood-soaked and panting. As they retreated, a final sight stopped them dead. From the fog beyond the corpse rats, a massive skeletal claw curled around the tunnel mouth. Then a face, no, a skull, draped in necrotic skin, one green glowing eye flaring with hunger, watched them. Varkhazhul. He did not chase, he only stared, like a beast measuring its prey. Later, Boric staggered before Thane Brock, covered in blood, a chunk of Skaven bone still embedded in his shoulder. Undead. Skaven dead, walking. Rotted worm in the deep, eyes like fire. Big as a keep. Brock's beard bristled. A dragon? Aye, but not alive. Worse. The chamber grew silent. Brock Flamebeard turned to his iron breakers. "Ready the axes. Wake the ancestor runes. Seal every shaft, every vent." He spat on the stone. "We're not dealing with rat thieves anymore. This is death come crawling. And we'll bury it so deep even the gods forget it." But even as his orders echoed deep below Kazad Gromdur, the Wyrm breathed again. And the mountain would never sleep easy again. Chapter 11. Eshin in Disarray. The air stank of melted copper and fur. Screams echoed through the fungal warrens of the Blackfang depths. Skaven stronghold turned slaughterhouse. No one knew who commanded anymore. No warlord's scent marked the halls. Only rot, only chaos. But amidst the mess, Packmaster Skreekweasel thrived. The coup in the smoke nest. It began with a whispered meeting. Hidden from the eyes of loyal blades, Skreek summoned warlock engineer Krizik Sparksnout, the bloated rat who'd once powered his alchemical assaults, into a torchlit chamber carved with warp runes. Krizik arrived surrounded by his mech clan, 4 rivet-covered, soot-caked monstrosities of Skaven, clad in rusted boiler armor. They clanked and sparked, their eyes replaced with brass lenses. Krizik sneered as he approached Skreek, twitching fingers nervously wrapped around a sparking voltage wand. "You summon me, Packmaster?" "Should be the other way, yes. You owe me, my genius, my bolts, my boom." Skreek nodded, smiled even, offered a bowl of boiled eyeballs and wine of warp oil. A gift, yes, for loyalty, for brilliance. Krizik grabbed a chunk, biting it in half, and gagged. "Flour? What is this?" His stomach convulsed, smoke poured from his nostrils. Blood and bile gushed from his eyes. One of his metal limbs detonated, tearing a Warp-Ness drone in half. "Poison," he wheezed, collapsing as his organs began to dissolve. "Not poison," Skreek grinned, stepping over the convulsing body. "Improvement." He jammed a warp blade into the warlock's neck and twisted until the spinal cord snapped like a stretched harp string. The mech rats tried to retaliate, but Twitch Scalp and his assassins descended from the ceiling, slitting throats and puncturing lung pipes in a fountain of steam, sparks, and hot blood. It was over in seconds. The warband fractures. By dawn cycle, Skreek wore Sparksnout's gear like a trophy. The warlock's gear was dismantled, redistributed to those most loyal through threats, bribery, and a few well-placed disappearances. The rest of the engineer's retinue were lashed together and fed to warp leeches, their screams echoing through every tunnel mouth. Warband leaders panicked. Needletail, missing since the collapse of the vault, was presumed dead, or worse, devoured. Warlock Stick the Mad, formerly Krizik's rival, declared himself prophet of the coming death dragon and led his crew into the fog, never to be seen again. Others tried to rise, only to find rotted Skaven heads nailed to their sleeping nest doors, lips still whispering secrets in undeath. Now there were 3 kinds of Skaven left. The cowards, who burrowed into deep holes, eating rats and praying not to be noticed. The survivors, those who kissed Skreek's paw with hatred in their eyes. And the mad, the ones who turned to the worm. The wormlings rise. A new cult had formed. They called themselves the Fleshless Fangs, Skaven who bathed in fog and licked bone, who carved runes into their own skin with dragon teeth. They spoke in hushed tones of Varkhazhul not as a beast, but as a god-beast, a Skaven deity reborn in bone and fire. One by one, Skaven began defecting. Warriors wandered off and returned with glowing eyes and charred fur, giggling and bleeding, but stronger. A slave-keeper saw his pit turn into a shrine of ash. Another woke to find his tail missing, offered to the Wyrm. Skreek watched it all from his throne of stitched hide, eyes narrowed. Power breeds madness. But madness breeds loyalty. He didn't stop them. He let the cult grow. because he knew, when the time came, they would worship him too. After all, who woke the god? Who fed it first? Who tamed it? His tail curled with joy as he hissed to Twitch Scalp. We let them pray to bones, but when the bones march, we ride atop them. And beneath it all the mountain rumbled, as Varkhazhul fed on the fog and prepared to rise once more. Chapter 12. Feeding the Worm. The vault walls bled. Green ichors seeped through the cracks like tears from a rotting god, thick and hot, dripping onto bones that twitched when no one touched them. The air had grown denser, heavier, not with moisture, but with malice. It pressed down on fur, crushed lungs, whispered in ears not yet torn off. And through it all, Varkhazhul hung above the pit like a suspended corpse, wings twitching, chained by bone and hate. But the chains were breaking, and Skreek Weasel had a plan. "We bind the beast," he hissed. Skreek stood before a circle of rag-wrapped slaves, engineers, cultists, and traitor chiefs, all trembling, all afraid. Even Twitch Scalp, loyal to a fault, eyed the packmaster now with a mixture of awe and thinly veiled horror. Around them the air was thick with warp residue. Every torch sputtered green. Sparks danced on the breath of the dragon like flies on dung. Skreek jabbed a claw at a massive blueprint etched on a flayed dwarf hide stretched across a pillar. Warpstone chains, forged from fallen dwarf metal, blood-quenched and carved with runes of agony. We wrap the beast in pain, yes, yes, turn hunger into loyalty, break its will like slave bone. The cultists nodded, some weeping openly in joy. The engineers scribbled formulas on scraps of bark and bone. One drooled uncontrollably. Skreek turned his gaze to the pit. The worm moved again. A flick of a tail shattered 3 skulls that had rolled too close. Its one good eye, burning with necrotic flame, now rarely closed. Chapter 13. Needle-Tail's Last Gambit. In the pitch-black guts of the Under-Empire, Snickchick Needletail moved like a phantom wrapped in rage. His fur was matted with blood, not just from the vault's collapse, but from the dozen backstabs he'd survived crawling out of that forsaken pit. His left eye was sealed shut with dried pus and scab, a claw wound from a coward's blade. His ribs ached with every breath, but he had something now that Skreek did not. Desperation. And worse, mutants, allies of necessity. Needletail's new followers were rejects, warped gutter runners cast out for breathing warp fumes too long or for feeding on things Skaven weren't meant to eat. Their bodies were malformed, eyes grown shut, jaws split in halves, tails like scorpions or tentacles. What they were fast. They were loyal because no one else wanted them. And above all, they hated Skreek. Needletail hunched in a hollow carved from a massive dwarf rib cage, surrounded by his wretches. "Skreek seeks godhood," he hissed. "He rides the beast in dreams. But dreams burn. I burn him instead." The mutants chittered. One licked a bone blade shaped from his own thigh. Another coiled her tail around a rat skull and crushed it slowly, moaning. The raid. They struck at dusk cycle, when Screech Warband was distracted, hauling heavy warpstone chains toward the vault pit. Slaves screamed under the weight, and cultists sang death hymns in tongues not spoken since the Black Plague. They didn't see the shadows slither in. Twitch Scalp, Skreek's second in command, was overseeing the hauling, snapping his whip and hurling insults. He barely blinked before a 3-armed mutant pounced from the ceiling, dragging him to the floor with a wet crack. Guttural screams echoed. Steel met bone. One of Skreek's engineers had his skull peeled back before he could activate his lightning gauntlet. Another was stabbed by 5 tail barbs at once, then hurled into the chain pit, where a half-conscious slave tore out his throat in panic. It was over in minutes. Twitch's scalp was bound in barbed wire and dragged through broken tunnels, leaving a trail of fur, blood, and torn teeth. The interrogation. They threw Twitch into a pit of broken stone, lit only by a single shard of warp lamp embedded in the wall. His breath rasped. His left foot twisted wrong, snapped at the ankle. Needletail crouched low, face inches from his. "You stink of lies and coward cunning," he murmured. "Tell me what Skreek hides, or I let Warpjaw here gnaw off your soul." From the dark, one of the mutants giggled and drooled, fingering a syringe filled with boiling black fluid. Twitch spat blood. "You'll die screaming. Skreek has the Wyrm now. He will ride its fire over your corpse." "Ah, so he does seek control, not just worship." Needletail's smile widened. He gestured. 2 mutants grabbed Twitch's limbs. The torture began. First, the whiskers. Each one pulled with hot pincers until the stench of burnt flesh rose. Then the tail, carved inch by inch like a meat skewer. Finally, Needletail leaned in and bit off Twitch's left ear. "What chained? What spell? How? Tell me." Twitch finally screamed. "The Warpstone, the chains, they bleed pain. They'll bind it in agony. He'll lash the Wyrm like a dog." Neatly leaned back, eyes wide. "He means to enslave it." Then he grinned like a beast. "That fool. That arrogant fool. Reckoning looms." Later. Needletail stood above the pit, watching Twitch's scalp convulse on the ground, his eye leaking blood, his tongue gone. He turned to his freakin. "We let Skreek finish his work, build the chains, then we kill him, take the beast, and burn what's left." And in the darkness, the Wyrm heard. Chapter 14. Clash in the Vault. The vault stank of betrayal. Even before the first throat was slit, before the first warp blade hissed through fur and bone, the air carried it, murder. It shimmered like heat haze, thick with warp taint, heavy with the scent of burnt hair, fear sweat, and treachery. Atop a bone dais overlooking the pit where Varkhazhul stirred in restless hatred, Skreekweasel raised a clawed fist. Around him, cultists chanted, gutter runners prowled, and engineers finished bolting the last warpstone chain into the ancient Dwarven clamps, jutting from the obsidian walls. Sparks danced in the fog. Runes glowed. The worm shifted again, massive, twitching, a mountain of rage and rot. One bound eye opened slowly, leaking pus and green fire. Skreek grinned. "Soon, mine." Then the assassins struck. The backstab. A shriek tore through the chanting. A night runner's slit ear to jaw collapsed beside the ritual stone. Another, coughing black blood, staggered out of the shadows, a needle-thin blade jutting from his spine. Then from the shadows, snicked Chick Needletail, eyes gleaming with blood-hate, fur slick with swamp oil, flanked by his mutant warband, the wretched Claws. Skreek barely turned before the first bolt hit his shoulder. He stumbled back, eyes wide. "You," he spat, "you're dead, crushed, eaten." Needletail bared fangs, survived, watched, waited. Now, I take your beast." He hurled a flask. It burst mid-air, releasing a cloud of rust-colored gas that melted a cultist's face on contact. Screams erupted. Flesh sloughed. The fog was poison. And panic. Civil war ignites. Then it exploded. Skaven turned on Skaven in a frenzy of claws and shrieks. Warp lightning arced from a half-mad engineer, blasting a mutant into smoking ash, but 2 others tore his limbs free in return, wearing his bones as masks. Smoke bombs burst, reducing visibility to claw's reach. Slaves, cultists, engineers, assassins, gutter runners, all fought, no sides clear. Loyalty evaporated in an instant. A Skaven choked on his own tongue from tainted gas. Another tried to flee, only to be impaled by 5 spears from his own kin, squealing. One of the engineers activated a Warpstone gauntlet and disintegrated 3 mutants in a wave of screaming energy before the gauntlet exploded, taking him and a dozen nearby with it in a geyser of green flame. Blood sprayed across the bone pillars, tails were trampled, eyes torn out, throats bit through. It was not battle, it was a massacre. The beast breaks, and Varkhazhul watched. He did not roar, not yet. He waited, eye flickering. The violence fed him, the fog thickening, blood spilling into the pit like a sacrament. The chains burned his skin, the runes itched, but his hatred drowned it all. Then a misfired lightning bolt struck a Warpstone shackle directly. It cracked. Varkhazhul moved. Skreek turned, bloodied, shrieking, "No, no, not ready, not ready!" But it was too late. The worm reared back, its jaw unhinging like a snake's. With one colossal flex, its right wing burst free, shredding the bindings. Bone splinters and warp steel bolts whistled through the air like shrapnel, impaling screaming Skaven. It lunged forward, one claw catching a mutant mid-sprint, crushing him into a blood mist. Another tail swipe cleaved through 6 warlocks in one stroke. The fog boiled. The vault cracked. And finally, Varkhazhul roared. It was a soundless scream at first, so low it shattered the bones in one's ears, so deep it sucked the air from lungs. Then came the sound, a true roar, a hurricane of death-forged fury that brought half the vault's ceiling crashing down. Skaven were flattened, buried alive. Others tried to flee, climbing over corpses, only to be dragged back by tail or claw. Needletail fought like a beast, slicing through cultists, but a falling column separated him from the exit. He hissed and vanished into a tunnel. Skreek, claw broken, fur soaked in blood, stood trembling on the dais. "We can still bond you. Obey. Serve." Varkhazhul stared. Then, as if mocking him, it opened its jaws and vomited a torrent of necrotic bile, melting the dais and sending Skreek screeching into the wreckage. The vault unleashed. What remained of the warbands was ash, bone, and ruin. The worm stood atop it, wings spread, eye ablaze. No longer bound, no longer asleep, only hungry. Chapter 15. Dwarfs March. The oath was carved in stone and blood. Kazad Gromdur had not fallen in 800 years. Not to greenskin, not to beastmen, not even when fire from the sky burned the mountainside. But now the halls whispered of death. Undying death. Fog crept up the deepest wells. The forge fires sputtered, the ale turned bitter. It was time. And in flame. Thane Brock Flamebeard stood at the head of 30 ironbreakers, armored in plate inscribed with runes of shielding, oath, and vengeance. Each dwarf's face was grim. No chance, no war cries. Only the deep silence of doom awaited. Behind them, 2 runesmiths carried staves bound in copper and gold, bound to ancient granite stone cores carved during the founding of the hold. The stone glowed faintly, the ancestor spirits stirring in anticipation. The lower gates groaned open. Fog curled like fingers licking at their boots. "Down we go," Flamebeard growled. "Let's see what stirs in the guts of the world." Tunnels of rot. The tunnels were broken. Collapsed stone and twisted steel beams blocked whole paths. Bones lay half buried in warp-tainted slime. The air tasted like sour iron and moldy tombs. The dwarves pressed on, axes clenched tight, eyes narrowed beneath helm crests. In a collapsed mining shaft, they found their first enemy. A corpse. Then a second, Skaven, half-reanimated, crawling on elbows, its tongue split like a snake's, eyes weeping pus. It let out a rattling screech and lunged, only to be bisected mid-air by Flamebeard's rune-axe. More followed. Dozens. Wrought warp rats, twitching and stitched together, some held up by sinew alone. Their bones had been reforged with nails, scrap metal, even other rats. One Skaven had fused itself to a warp battery, crackling with sparks as it screamed and charged. The iron breakers met them like a storm wall. Steel slammed into skull, hammers crushed spines, rune shields were soaked in bile and brain. One dwarf took a bite to the neck, but laughed as the runes on his collar ignited, flash-frying the Skaven in mid-gnaw. The battle left 18 corpses, and 2 dwarves wounded, one torn nearly in half. Flamebeard knelt beside the fallen brother, wiped blood from his brow, and placed a gold-stamped coin over each eye. Your axe struck true. The ancestors await. The shrines beneath. Deeper still, the fog grew thicker, but the stone grew older. They passed into a forgotten portion of the deep forge paths, buried during the War of the Third Age. Carvings of old Dwarven kings, untouched by time, lined the walls. Their eyes stared at the dwarves as they passed, and the rune lords whispered prayers. Then they found them. Hidden alcoves, sealed behind rune-locked stone. Shrines. Inside lay weapons forged in an age when dragons still soared. Axe blades of black steel, warhammers veined with red gold rune-silver, spears tipped with obsidian drawn from the molten heart of Kazad. Each weapon was embedded in an anvil of pure stone, bound by ancestral blood runes. One by one the iron breakers approached, placed their palms on the stones, and spoke their names. Only the worthy could lift them. Flamebeard's axe hissed as it drank from the shrine. The runes along its blade, dormant for decades, blazed to life. "So, the gods wake too," he muttered. Behind him the rune lords nodded. "The worm is near," one said. The other added, "and it remembers." March to ruin. With new weapons in hand, the dwarves pressed on. They stepped over reanimated bones, past blackened Skaven corpses clawed from within, and into chambers where death still breathed. And the path led down. Always down. To the vault. To the beast. To vengeance. Chapter 16. Terror Ascendant. The vault, once sealed in ancestral magic, once filled with dark prayers and vile secrets, now echoed with chaos incarnate. Fog twisted into snarling shapes. Blood streamed down fractured walls like veins in the stone, and high above, wings of rotting leather and torn sinew beat the air with thunderous violence. Varkhazhul the carrion worm had taken to the sky. No longer tethered to pit or ritual, the corpse dragon circled the shattered chamber like a predator in a cage far too small. Its bones cracked with every motion, scraping against the vault ceiling. Shards of stone fell with each beat of its wings, and from its chest a hollow cavity where a heart once pulsed spewed warp magic. The magic of corruption. It was not a breath, it was a beam, a lance of putrid green flame fired from its rib cage through ribs twisted into arcane sigils. Where it landed, Skaven died screaming. One night runner had barely turned before the magic struck him. His skin peeled away in a flash, muscles unraveling, eyes bursting into steam. A cultist tried to shield himself with a warp-blessed talisman. It melted into his skull. Even those nearby were not spared. Flesh boiled, tails ignited, and bones snapped, as if every nerve inside their bodies was being punished for for daring to survive. And the worm roared, not out of hunger or pain, but triumph. A duel in madness? Skigweasel crawled from beneath the debris, half his body cooked and ragged. His right arm hung by threads of sinew, warp-burned black. One eye wept blood. But in his left paw he still gripped a dagger, carved from the fang of a plague beast. Across the carnage, Snickchick Needletail stumbled forward, bleeding from a dozen wounds, one leg dragging, the fur across his face peeled back by fire. The Wyrm had decimated their warbands, their armies, their dream. But they still had each other. Enemies by blood, rivals by fate. Skreek hissed through broken teeth. Still breathing, yes, yes. Needletail raised a dagger. Not for long. They clashed like starving rats in a bucket. No elegance, no honor, just teeth, claw, blade. Skreek bit into Needletail's shoulder, tearing flesh like wet cloth. Needletail stabbed blindly into Skreek's side, puncturing a lung. Skreek screamed, pulled back, and drove his plague dagger into Needletail's gut, twisting until the blade snapped. Needletail gasped, bile bubbling from his mouth. But he didn't fall alone. With a last curse, he headbutted Skreek, sending both plummeting from a jagged ledge of cracked stone, tumbling into the sludge below. They hit with a sickening crunch, limbs entangled, both broken. Only twitching remained. The scattering. Above them, the few remaining Skaven watched the duel's end, watched their so-called leaders die in mud and bile, and broke. They ran, screaming, weeping, clawing over each other. One tried to scramble up a rock face and was pulled down by a frenzied wormling who'd lost his mind to worship. Others threw themselves into crevices, preferring darkness to flame. Only a handful made it out. They didn't look back. Behind them, Varkhazhul soared once more, dragging bone chains behind him like a king of the dead. He no longer crawled. He hunted. The vault is his. The carrion worm landed atop the bone dais, crushed under his earlier bile. He opened his mouth, and a dozen reanimated Skaven rose from the gore, bloated, stitched, still screaming. And the fog thickened. Kazad Gromdur had yet to see the horror clawing at its roots. But the worm no longer waited. He had fed. And now he remembered how to kill. Chapter 17. Ancestral Fire. The moment they broke through the final barrier, the stink hit them. A choking queeg of rot, magic, and something older, the breath of a god corpse. The dwarves of Kazad Gromdur, hardened veterans of stone and steel, wavered for the first time in living memory. The vault opened before them like the throat of a dying world. Walls scorched black, bones fused into the stone, a fog so thick it clung to their beards like meat grease, heavy with the iron stink of blood and warp death. Flamebeard's iron breakers advanced in a silent, grim line. Their boots crunched over scorched Skaven skulls and the still twitching limbs of the reanimated, severed cleanly but still writhing. And in the center of it all, the beast. The horror revealed. Varkhazhul loomed like a cathedral of flesh and decay. Its spine scraped the ceiling, wings spread wide, hole pierced and oozing green flame. Its jaw opened and closed like a forge bellows, exhaling clouds of fetid gas that made their eyes burn. The dwarves watched in horror as undead Skaven, stitched with bronze wire and nailed into unnatural shapes, crawled across the beast's back like maggots on a bloated carcass. Others formed in the shadows, limping, jerking, singing in broken Eshin tongues. By Grimnir, whispered Runelord Durgan Stonebind, eyes wide behind glowing lenses. Flamebeard snarled, "No more awe, no more waiting. Wards, now! The rite begins." The two Runelords advanced, planting their staves into the vault floor. They knelt at opposite ends of a dwarven rune circle, half consumed by the Wyrm's bile. With shaking hands they pulled out shard stones of ancestral binding, older than the hold itself. Together they began to chant, deep, rhythmic tones, the language of the stone. Runes flared into light, fiery orange battling sickly green. The magic clashed. The vault howled. Varkhazhul turned its massive head, eye burning. It sensed the runes. It remembered the pain. It roared. The charge of ire. "Now, lads," Flamebeard barked, "we distract it, or the rune lords die." He raised his rune-etched war axe, which burned with ancestral flame. "Ironbreakers for Kazad Gromdur!" They surged. The dwarves moved like a living wall of fury, shields locked, axes gleaming, roaring oaths so loud they pierced the roar of the Wyrm. They struck from the flank. Varkhazhul pivoted to meet them, tail whipping, crushing stone and dwarf alike. One warrior was smashed flat, his spine driven into his chest. Another was impaled by a reanimated clawed bone that rose from the floor beneath him. Still they came. They hacked into its leg tendons, severed undead claws, and one even climbed the beast, burying a rune hammer into its spine, before being flung off and dashed into pulp. Varkhazhul tried to unleash its ribcage warp fire, only to have a dwarf hurl a binding rune clamp into the heart hole, muffling the discharge into a choking sputter. "Hold it longer," one rune lord cried. "The seal is not yet complete." Burning the ancients. Suddenly the beast lashed its wings. The wind was a hurricane. 5 dwarves were thrown backward, crashing into pillars. One was ripped in half by sheer force, entrails spiraling mid-air like grim streamers. Still Flamebeard remained. His beard burned with rune light and his axe had begun to sing. He charged the beast's head. He leapt from a ledge, his silhouette burning in the glow of the rune lord's spell, and drove his axe straight into Varkhazhul's eye socket. The beast screamed. Not a roar, a scream. It recoiled, smashing pillars, biting at itself in blind fury. The rune lord's circle blazed to life. "Now!" they shouted as one. "The binding holds. For now." Chains of fire and rune light erupted from the floor, coiling around Varkhazhul's limbs, wings, throat. The beast thrashed, collapsing to one side, toppling corpses and bone towers in its descent. It roared again, but the vault walls shuddered, not from rage, but from the seal taking hold. Varkhazhul was not dead, but he was bound once more. The survivors stood over scorched earth, piles of burning undead, and a Wyrm that hissed hatred through shattered teeth. Flamebeard coughed blood and stood, bones broken, fur singed. "To hell with prophecy," he spat. "We forge fate in stone." Chapter 18. Sealed in Stone. The vault wheezed. The air trembled as Varkhazhul strained against the binding runes, coiled in chains of rune fire and warpstone-tainted iron. His bones cracked under pressure, but still he moved, pulsing with hate. The chains cut deep, glowing brighter with every motion, but so did the beast's resistance. He would not remain chained for long. Vane Brock Flamebeard stood at the edge of the collapsing battlefield, blood slicking the golden braids of his beard. His axe was shattered, half melted from contact with warp rot. Of his iron breakers, less than a dozen remained, armor scorched, faces blackened with soot and blood. The rune lords chanted still, their voices hoarse, power waning. The chains were failing. Flamebeard turned to Durgan Stonebind, the elder rune lord, voice rasping. "We need more than binding. We need a tomb." Stonebind stared at him. "You're not thinking—" "I am," Brock growled. "There's one place it can't escape. One place soaked in its own death curse, the vampire tomb. Where this madness began. The bait. They lured it with sacrilege." Flembeard and the surviving warriors dragged the broken sarcophagus from its ruined shrine, a slab of obsidian and silver still reeking of ancient death, and smashed it. They shattered the remnants of the vampire lord's crown, spilled the blood-slicked bones, and cast the cursed chalice into the Wyrm's chained path, all while chanting the names of dwarf ancestors long dead. Varkhazhul turned. The fog thickened. The chains cracked. It followed, dragged by hate, into the tomb. They lured the Wyrm down a spiraling shaft of bone and iron, the original sepulchral pit, carved from blackstone during the days of the vampire wars. The walls were carved with curses. Every footstep rang with ancient spite. Flamebeard ran ahead, torch in one hand, fragments of the vampire's crown in the other. He screamed curses in Kazad, every word a challenge, a dagger in the beast's mind. Come then wrought nothing, face Ancestral fire. Varkhazhul dove. He crashed through the ceiling of the tomb, half collapsing the chamber. The bindings still flickered around his limbs, but were dimming now, sparking. The worm's breath became ragged, no longer pain, fury, hunger. Flamebeard dropped the crown and turned to his kin. Seal it now, the sacrifice. Durgan's voice trembled. You won't make it. Don't need to, Flamebeard said softly. Only need to hold the bastard for just one more breath. He pressed a glowing rune-stone embedded in the heart of the tomb. It began to burn, white-hot, the ancestral collapse, a final measure carved in the Age of Doom, sealed behind blood oaths and pain. The ground began to quake. Ceiling beams snapped. Rocks screamed as they split and fell. Flamebeard stood beneath the collapsing vault, looking straight into the Wyrm's one burning eye. Back to the dark with you, he whispered, and stay damned. The ceiling fell. Massive slabs of blackstone crushed the beast's wings, then its neck, then its skull. Varkhazhul screamed, thrashing once, green flame pouring from its ribs, boiling corpses to ash. Then the final slab fell. Silence. Entombed. The surviving dwarves and rune lords completed the ritual with rune hammers and blood sigils, sealing the collapsed tomb under 30,000 tons of sacred stone and wards. Runes glowed once more, not in war, but in mourning. Varkhazhul was not slain, but he was buried, caged again by stone. A tomb of hate, locked with a key made of sacrifice. Aftermath. Durgan stood over the fresh stone, leaning heavily on his staff. No songs for Brock, he muttered. No feast, just the silence of stone. That's all we have left. But the dwarves raised their axes, and from far above in the still halls of Kazad Gromdur, the fires began to burn anew. Because the mountain still stood, because one dwarf had bought them one more age of peace, even if something stirred beneath it still. Chapter 19. Vermin remnants. The few who survived did not walk. They crawled, through rotting tunnels reeking of ash and bile, past corpses not yet still, through cracks barely wide enough for breath. Skaven survivors of the vault slaughter returned not in glory, but in terror. Eyes wide, claws twitching, sanity fractured. They whispered in the dark, of fire, bone, chains, screams that bent stone, and of the beast, the death dragon, crowned in bile and warp fire, whose stare turned blood to slime. Their tales spread like plague. Most were laughed at, until they tore their own throats out trying to stop the visions. The Under-Empire festers. Back in the festering depths of the Under-Empire, among warp-smog towers and flesh forges, the remnants trickled home. They came in ones, twos, never whole. Their pelts were scorched, their speech broken. They twitched at shadows and stabbed anyone who approached too quickly. Some died immediately, tails turned to stone, teeth liquefied by warp exposure. Others simply curled up in corners and howled until their hearts stopped. The story should have died with them. But one relic remained: the scrolls of Skreek. Buried beneath the corpse pile of a shattered nest crypt, wrapped in boiled hide, soaked in ichor, and stitched shut with tail hair, was Skreekweasel's personal grimoire. A collection of ravings, diagrams, etched glyphs, traitor maps, betrayal schedules, and, most importantly, the binding ritual to control Varkhazhul. One whisper rat found it. A broken thing called Sniff Flecknose, who slit the throat of the rat who saw him holding it, then smeared his blood on the walls in tribute to the Wyrm. Flecknose never got far. He choked to death on his own tongue within 2 tunnels. But the scroll reached others. It was read and copied. The Council of 13. In the Blackbone Tower of Skavenblight, the council sat amid shadows as always. The Seer Lords hissed and sniped. The Lords of War chittered and licked their claws. Most didn't even look up as the courier dumped the scrolls on the floor. "More madness," one muttered. "Another dead fool warlord chasing relics. Dragons are real, yes, but tameable? Stupid dead. Weasel lies. But one Seer Lord Pestileth stared long and hard at the final page, at the sigils burned into the hide, which still pulsed faintly with necromantic warp ink. He spoke no words, but his tail curled tight, because on the last page, beneath the raving scrawl and blood marks, was a symbol that had not been used since the Vampire Wars. Wyrm-God reborn. Seeds of madness. The council shelved the scrolls, laughed them off. But across the Underempire, copies began to surface, hidden in disease shrines, whispered through plague clans, passed among assassins like holy writ. A cult was growing again. A second coming, of death with wings, of Skaven riding the back of the apocalypse. And somewhere, deep beneath even Skavenblight, something stirred. A quake no dwarf felt, a breath no rat dared acknowledge, but a pulse, slow and steady, as if something buried was still very much alive. Chapter 20. Legacy of Decay. The rot never sleeps. In the fungal depths of the Underempire, far below the gaze of the council, below even the screaming pits where slaves mine warpstone with their tongues, there exists a place unspoken. It is a chamber of worship, carved from stolen dwarfstone, reinforced with bones, and lit by no flames, only the sickly green glow of warpstone cysts, pulsing like infected boils in the walls. Here they kneel, the Wyrmlings. Skaven whose minds have long since burst beneath the weight of forbidden whispers. Their skin blisters, their eyes shine green, their claws drip black, not from wounds, but from the leaking power seeping into their bones. They wear masks shaped like fanged skulls. Their tails are split, their voices fractured into hissing songs. Some no longer speak words, only chant in a tongue long buried with vampire lords. They gather around a monolithic stone, a chunk of collapsed vault, ripped from the heart of Varkhazhul's tomb, still soaked in his ichor. Embedded in it a fragment of fang, the size of a warlord's arm, pulsing softly with undeath. And beneath this monolith, a pool of blood never dries. Rats drink from it, bathe in it, paint their fur with it, in ritual patterns. Each night they sacrifice one of their own. Each night the glow grows brighter. The ritual. Tonight, the Wyrmlings circle tighter. One cultist, bloated and twitching from a warpstone overdose, is dragged forward. His snout peels open as if split from within. His ribs have grown outwards, forming jagged protrusions that make armor. They pin him to the stone. He doesn't scream. He laughs. He lives lives in us, yes. In blood, in bone. A high priest, once a warlock engineer of Clan Scryer, raises a rusted dagger made from Varkhazhul's melted shackle. He chants in a voice not his own. The blade plunges deep. The blood sprays across the altar stone, and the floor pulses. Once, twice. The heartbeat, the stirring. Far beneath, the mountain shifts. Kazad Gromdur sleeps uneasy. Deep rune words flicker once. A tremor touches the black stone roots. And in the depths of the sealed tomb, under 50,000 tons of sacred rock and ancestral binding sigils, the crack forms. Just a hairline, but it glows green. Inside, in the eternal dark, something shifts. A low, wet breath hisses from the buried void. Not awake, not yet, but remembering. Final words. In the cult chamber, the wormlings shriek in ecstasy. They claw at themselves. They carve scales into their flesh. They chant the name over and over, each time louder. Varkhazhul, Wyrm-God, Death Beast, Sky Eater. Rise, rise, rise. And from the monolith, the fang pulses again. Once more. Then goes dark. But they keep chanting. They will not stop. Because they know, in their cracked, warp-rotted hearts, the worm will rise again.